Is the United States really the most powerful nation, not just in the world, but in the history of the world? And if that's true, what does that mean in terms of what we should do and how we should behave in the world? And if it's not true, should that change how we behave in the world and what we do? How does that affect American national interest, whether you believe it or whether you don't? Is it even important whether you believe it? Well, I think that it's very important that we understand accurately just how powerful we are and what limits to our power may exist, if anything. And how should that govern our behavior both internationally and domestically? These are more important answers that you may think. And the situation is a little bit more critical than it may appear at surface because of who actually holds that position. Last Sunday on 60 Minutes, Scott Pelley interviewed someone of some importance you may have heard from who actually said that. Here's how it went.
Are the wars in Israel and Ukraine more than the United States can take on at the same time?
We're the United States of America, for God's sake. The most powerful nation in the history, not in the world, in the history of the world. The history of the world. We can take care of both of these and still maintain our overall international defense.
Okay, there's a couple of things that trouble me about that. Now, the first one is just that probably what should be self-evident is just the arrogance of the statement. This just like saying, what do you mean, can we do something? Of course we can. We're America. We can do anything we want to because we're the most powerful nation. And then you have to add another layer in the history of the world. We're not that powerful. We're not the most powerful nation in the history of the world. And there are some limits to our power. To ignore that reality is troubling because that's the second thing that concerns me about that is if he actually believes that, that could lead him to making decisions that affect all of our lives that's based on a faulty assumption. First of all, this is not 1990. In 1992, 1993, we were arguably the most powerful nation on the planet. And you could have argued that at that moment in time, it was the most in terms of relative power in the world. Now, the Roman Empire kind of was pretty strong for quite a long time. So not sure that we're going to beat that tag. And there was some other empires in the world that were very powerful. And it's not really important whether we want to, rank them in the first or second or third or whatever. That's actually not that important. What's important for us right now is to recognize the true nature of our power. Now, in 1992, the Soviet Union had just collapsed. And so all the Warsaw Pact and all the power that the Cold War had been created for had dissolved, basically. And it was just nothing but chaos and no organized power. So all that NATO had been formed to oppose for all those decades was now gone. Meanwhile, in China, they were still a third world country. And they were basically a peasant army. And it hadn't changed much in decades, since the 1950s, 1960s. And so they were no threat beyond their borders. And so in relative terms, the United States was obviously quite friendly with all of Europe. And then the potential two biggest adversaries were relatively weak or very weak. So in that moment, yes, we were. Problem is, it's not 1990 anymore. Now then, the situation is very different. Russia is no longer the horrible situation it was before. And of course, they still have the globe's largest nuclear arsenal. And especially China is not as weak as they were. They're now a rising power, second biggest economy in the world, and a growing military power that can project power into its region. So the United States, it's not that we've gotten weaker, but it's that other players are actually rising in capacity. And so we can't just do whatever we want all the time. And specifically to Pelley's question there, can we now begin adding more money and more weapons and more ammunition support for Israel as we continue to do the substantial amount of support that we've done for Ukraine for now into our 20th month? Now, the answer to that is no, we cannot. Because there are limits to our power. We're already running up against it. We've had many people warn, both in NATO and in the United States, that our ammunition stockpiles are dangerously low already. And the desire for Ukraine is more and more and more. Now you're adding in some of the similar categories, Israel. They're trying to get the same kind of thing. And there's no telling how long that war could go. I mean, we'll talk about that in additional deep dives. But that war is going to probably take a long time based on historical precedents of what Israel's trying to do in Gaza City. Now then you add on top of that what the United States is trying to add in the Indo-Pacific area in a potential clash with China, which of course I don't believe we should ever choose to fight China in a war over something like Taiwan. Unless we're attacked by China, we should not go to war with them. But certainly many think that we should, and there possibilities exist that we could, because we can't eliminate the possibility that China might preemptively attack someday. If that happens, we've got to have the capacity to defend, and to try and claim that we can be all this engaged in the Russia-Ukraine war with all of the things that requires in both cash, weapons, and ammunition for an extended period of time. Now add another war support in Israel with the Hezbollah situation, and continue to build up in the Indo-Pacific area and keep us safe in all the other parts of the world, and hope that the situation in Israel doesn't expand into a regional war. And we just sent 2 aircraft carrier strike groups in there towards that end. Then we have to understand that there are limits to our power. And we cannot do all of this stuff just because we're American, just because we want to. There are limits to our power. It is foolish and potentially self-destructive if we continue acting on the belief that we literally can do anything everywhere all the time, however we want to, and no one can do anything about it. That's not accurate, because there are limits, and we have to do things differently. Look, America is very strong, and as long as we don't go seeking monsters to slay and fights to get into that we don't need to get into, we can defend ourselves indefinitely. We do have a very strong military. We've got the ability to project power around the world that's unmatched. Nobody else can do that. Not even China, definitely not Russia. We do have that capacity. That we have presence all over the place, the Middle East, the Indo-Pacific, Europe, South America, Africa. We've got power projection capabilities everywhere, and they are substantial. They are not, however, unlimited. There are definite limits to it. And as long as we have policies that recognize our genuine power, but don't go too far in believing we have more power than we do, then we're going to be fine. Our economic is going to be fine. Our national security is going to be fine. And we can go on living a great standard of living. But we have to be careful that arrogance and presumption doesn't make us falsely believe that we have more power than we do, and that we can do more things than we should be able to, things that are beyond what we need for our own national security and beyond our own economic prosperity. Those are the things that our government is supposed to ensure, not to be looking overseas for ways to project more power just because that's what some people want to do, especially if it puts us all in peril. And that is something that I believe is more of a possibility than many may require. And so the Bible itself says pride comes before a fall, and it's self-evident that that's the case. Is arrogance has been the downfall of a great many. We need to make sure it's not us. Let's have a sober view, recognize our genuine capacity and our genuine power, but don't overemphasize it through arrogance and get ourselves overextended to the point to where one day we actually may stumble and fall. That's your deep dive for today. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.